My wife left me. For my best friend, 20 years later, she needed my blood to live. The nurse kept her voice professionally neutral when she said Rachel's name, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had checked my chart twice before asking if I was certain about my decision. I told her I needed time, which was a lie. I'd already decided the moment I saw Rachel's name on the hospital notification. I just wanted to sit in that small waiting room and remember what it felt like to be 28 years old and completely wrong about everything I thought I knew. The letter had arrived 3 days earlier from the hospital's transplant coordinator. Rare blood type, critical need. My name flagged in the National Registry as a match. I had enrolled 15 years ago during a workplace blood drive, back when helping strangers felt like a simple equation. The coordinator had been apologetic about the personal connection, offered to find another donor if the situation was complicated. I told her I would think about it, but I had not thought about it, not really. I'd simply let the old machinery turn over in my mind, the same machinery that had kept me breathing through the first year after she left, the same patience that had carried me through the divorce and the careful reconstruction of a life I had not planned to live alone. I spent most of my time in the garage. The house had always been too big, and after my daughter left for college, it became a museum of choices I no longer recognized. The garage was different. I had built the workbench myself, installed the pegboard with its careful arrangement of tools, swept the concrete until the oil stains became a kind of map. I knew every corner. It did not surprise me. Rachel used to say I disappeared into projects. She meant it as criticism, an accusation that I cared more about fixing broken things than about fixing us. I never corrected her because correction would have required me to explain what I was actually doing out there, and I did not have the language for it then. I was not fixing things. I was learning how systems worked, how pressure found cracks, how small oversights compounded into catastrophic failures. I was teaching myself to see clearly. She left on a Tuesday. I remember because I had taken the afternoon off to replace the kitchen faucet. The old one had developed a leak that no amount of tightening could resolve, and I had finally ordered the replacement parts. I was on my back under the sink, my hands slick with pipe grease, when I heard her car pull into the driveway. 2 car doors closed instead of 1. I remember wiping my hands on a rag and walking to the window, already knowing but not yet believing. Marcus was helping her load suitcases into his trunk. He was my college roommate, the best man at my wedding, the person I had called when my father died, because I needed someone who understood the particular weight of that loss. He was also careful not to look at the house as he worked. Rachel moved with efficiency, no wasted motion, the same way she packed for business trips. When they finished, she came inside and found me standing in the kitchen doorway. She had prepared a speech. I could tell by the way she held her shoulders, by the measured tone that doctors use when delivering bad news. She talked about needs and growth and the ways people change. She talked about emotional availability and how she had tried, really tried, but I had always been somewhere else. She talked about Marcus understanding her in ways I never could. She did not apologize. She did not cry. When she finished, she asked if I had anything to say. I told her the faucet was fixed. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was simply the sound of one person realizing they had become incomprehensible to another. She left her keys on the counter and walked out. Marcus drove away without looking back. I finished installing the faucet. The new one did not leak. My daughter was 16. Rachel had timed the departure for a weekday afternoon, which meant Jenna would come home from school to a changed world without warning. I met her at the door and told her simply that her mother had left, that she was staying with Marcus, that the details could wait, but the facts could not. Jenna's face went through several expressions in quick succession, confusion and anger and something harder to name, before settling into a careful blankness that looked too much like my own. She asked if I was okay. I told her I would be. She asked if we would be okay. I told her yes, and I made sure it was true. The divorce was efficient. Rachel's lawyer proposed terms, my lawyer reviewed them, and I signed everything without contest. The house, the custody arrangement, the division of assets, all of it processed through the system like any other transaction. I did not fight because fighting would have required me to want something from her, and I had learned in that kitchen doorway that I did not. She had already taken the only thing that mattered, which was the story I had been telling myself about who we were. The rest was just property. Marcus sent one letter about 6 months after they moved in together. He wrote about regret and circumstance and the unexpected nature of love. He wrote that he had never intended to hurt me, that things had simply developed between them, that he hoped someday I could understand. He wrote that our friendship had mattered to him. He did not write that he was sorry, not exactly. He wrote around it the way people do when they want credit for acknowledging wrongdoing without the burden of actually admitting fault. I read the letter once and filed it in the cabinet where I kept old tax returns and warranties for appliances we no longer owned. I did not tell people the whole story. When neighbors asked, I said the marriage had not worked out. When coworkers expressed sympathy, I thanked them and changed the évasion subject. When Jenna asked if I was angry, I told her anger was a choice I did not need to make. She looked at me strangely when I said that, and I understood that my calm confused her more than rage would have. But rage required energy I needed for other things, for making sure she got to school on time, and that dinner was on the table, and that the house remained the kind of place where life could continue despite everything that had ended. The years accumulated quietly. Jenna graduated high school, then college. She became an architect, which pleased me in ways I did not fully articulate even to myself. She understood how things were built, how weight was distributed, how foundations either held or did not. She visited twice a year and called every Sunday. She never asked about her mother in my presence, though I knew they spoke occasionally. I never asked what they discussed. Some boundaries exist to protect everyone involved. I dated twice in the first 5 years. Both women were kind and intelligent. Both relationships ended when they realized I was not going to let them past a certain threshold. I was good company, attentive and considerate, but also gone in a fundamental sense. The second woman, a teacher named Anne, told me I was still married to someone who did not exist anymore. She was right. I was still married to the person I had been, the one who believed loyalty and patience were enough to hold anything together. After Anne, I stopped trying. It was efficiency, not bitterness. I had a job, a daughter building a good life, a house needing maintenance. I learned to cook properly. I read challenging books. I took long walks. I slept without medication and woke without dread. I had built a life that worked, and working was enough. The call from the hospital came on a Thursday evening. I was refinishing a chair that had belonged to my grandmother, sanding away decades of accumulated varnish to reveal the original wood beneath. The coordinator explained the situation with practiced efficiency. Rachel had been sick for several years, kidney failure, complications, a transplant that had not taken, and now a rare blood disorder that required a very specific match. My blood type was rare enough that I had been flagged immediately when her doctors ran the compatibility scan. I asked what would happen if I said no. The coordinator paused, then said they would continue searching, but time was limited. Rachel's condition was deteriorating. Without the transfusion, the prognosis was poor. I asked for time to consider. The coordinator said she understood and gave me her direct number. I set down the sandpaper and looked at the chair. It was maple, solid construction, joints that had held for 80 years because someone had cared enough to build it properly. My grandmother had sat in it every morning with her coffee and the newspaper. After she died, my mother had stored it in her basement, unwilling to use it, but unable to let it go. With Ifanas, she passed. I brought it home and added it to the list of things that needed attention. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks, stripping away layers, discovering the craftsmanship underneath. I called Jenna that night. She listened without interrupting while I explained the situation, the blood match, the decision that somehow belonged to me now. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. "I don't know yet," I said. "Do you want to know what I think?" "Always." "I think you're going to do it because that's who you are. You're going to do it because you've never been the kind of person who lets someone die just because they hurt you." "She didn't just hurt me," I said quietly. "I know. She hurt both of us. But you're still going to do it." She was right, but not for the reasons she thought. I was not motivated by forgiveness or by some residual feeling for the woman Rachel had been. I was motivated by the same thing that had gotten me through the divorce and the empty house and all the years that followed. I was motivated by clarity. If I refused, I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I had been capable of cruelty after all. I would have introduced a variable I could not control, a question I could not answer, and I had worked too hard to build a life without those kinds of questions. I called the coordinator the next morning and told her I would do it. She scheduled the blood work for the following afternoon. The donation itself would happen 2 days later if the final compatibility tests confirmed the match. She thanked me, and her voice carried something beyond professional gratitude. She understood that this was not a simple transaction. The blood work took 20 minutes. A phlebotomist filled vials with practiced efficiency. Making small talk, I answered politely. When she finished, she placed a bandage over the needle site and told me someone would call with results. The call came that evening. Final match confirmed. Donation scheduled for Monday at 9. Standard instructions followed. I should eat well, hydrate, bring identification. The coordinator assured me everything would be documented properly given the circumstances. I spent the weekend finishing the chair. The final coat of oil brought out the grain in a way that made the wood look alive. I rubbed it in with steady circular motions, working section by section until the entire surface glowed with a warm amber light. When it dried, I carried it into the house and placed it in the corner of the living room where morning light would touch it first. Monday morning arrived clear. I ate oatmeal, drank water, dressed comfortably, and arrived early. The coordinator walked me through the process. 90 minutes in a private room, monitored throughout. Rest afterwards before leaving. She asked again if I had questions. I told her no. The room had 2 chairs and medical equipment I could not name. The nurse, Patricia, checked my vitals and explained each step. Everything was normal. Then she asked if I wanted to see Rachel before we started. The question landed like a stone in still water. I had not considered it. She doesn't know you're the donor, Patricia said quietly. The transplant team keeps that confidential unless both parties consent. If you want to remain anonymous, that's your right. I thought about it. I thought about walking into a hospital room and seeing what 20 years had done to the person I had once promised my life to. I thought about her seeing me and understanding what that meant, understanding that she owed her continued existence to someone she had discarded. I thought about the conversation we might have, the words that might need saying, the closure that people always talked about as if it were something you could achieve through the right combination of honesty and timing. No, I said. I don't need to see her. Patricia nodded and began prepping the equipment. I settled into the chair and rolled up my sleeve. The needle went in smoothly. I watched my blood flow through clear tubing toward collection bags. The process was painless. Patricia made small talk about her garden and her daughter's college applications. I responded politely. Mostly I watched the blood flow and thought about systems and pressure and the ways things broke. After 45 minutes, she checked the volume and nodded. They had enough. She removed the IV carefully and applied pressure with gauze, then secured it with tape. She brought juice and crackers and told me to take my time. The coordinator appeared after 20 minutes. She thanked me again, told me the transfusion would happen within the hour, and said the medical team was optimistic about Rachel's response. She said I was free to go whenever I felt ready. She said if I wanted updates on Rachel's condition, I could request them through her office. She said it again. I had done a good thing. I drove home carefully, attentive to the traffic and the pedestrians and the cyclists who appeared suddenly between parked cars. The house was exactly as I had left it. The chair glowed in the morning light. I made coffee and sat in my grandmother's chair and felt the solid weight of it beneath me. Jenna called that evening. I told her it was done, that the process had been straightforward, that I was fine. She asked if I'd seen her mother. I told her no. She was quiet for a moment, then said she was proud of me. I thanked her and asked about her latest project, a community center in a neighborhood that had not had proper public space in decades. She talked about load-bearing walls and natural light, and the way architecture could either welcome people or push them away. I listened and heard my daughter teaching me something I had always known but never articulated. We build what we need. We build what will hold. 3 weeks passed before the coordinator called again. Rachel had stabilized. The transfusion had worked. She would need ongoing treatment, but the immediate crisis had passed. The coordinator thanked me once more and said Rachel's family had expressed their gratitude through the transplant team. I thanked her for the update and ended the call. I did not tell Jenna about the call. I did not tell anyone. The knowledge sat in my chest like ballast, not heavy enough to burden me, but substantial enough to notice. I had given Rachel more time. What she did with it was no longer my concern, had not been my concern for 20 years, would never be my concern again. Marcus died 4 months later. I learned about it from an obituary Jenna forwarded without comment. Heart attack, sudden, survived by his wife Rachel and a brother in Oregon. Services were private. The obituary mentioned his career in finance and his volunteer work with youth sports leagues. It mentioned that he had been a devoted husband. It did not mention that he had once been my friend, or that devotion sometimes started with betrayal. I did not attend the service. I had not earned the right to grieve him, and he had not earned my public witness. But I thought about him that evening while I worked in the garage. I thought about the young man who had sat across from me in a dorm room, talking about philosophy and possibility and the people we wanted to become. I thought about how distance grows between intention and action, how small compromises compound into unrecognizable outcomes. I thought about how he had probably told himself a story that made it all make sense, that transformed taking another man's wife into something like fate or destiny or the kind of love that justified its own costs. I thought about all of that, and then I finished sanding the bookshelf I had been working on and swept the floor and turned off the lights. The letter from Rachel arrived 6 weeks after Marcus died. She had my address because we shared a daughter, because divorce did not erase the practical necessities of coordinated lives. The envelope was cream-colored and expensive. My name and address were written in handwriting I had not seen in 2 decades, but recognized immediately. I opened it in the kitchen where she had delivered her prepared speech so many years before. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, carefully composed. She thanked me for the donation. She said the hospital had eventually disclosed my identity after she directly asked, after the transplant coordinator had gently suggested that her recovery owed itself to a very personal sacrifice. She said she did not know how to carry the weight of that knowledge, how to reconcile the enormity of the gift with the history between us. She wrote about Marcus, about how his sudden death had forced her to examine the life they had built together. She wrote that it had not been what she expected, that the passion that had seemed so urgent and necessary had faded into a different kind of loneliness, one complicated by guilt and the knowledge that she had destroyed something good to chase something that turned out to be ordinary after all. She wrote that she understood if I hated her. She wrote that she would understand if I never wanted to hear from her again. But she needed me to know that she was sorry, truly sorry, for the pain she had caused me and Jenna. She needed me to know that saving her life had been an act of grace she did not deserve and would never be able to repay. She needed me to know that she thought about me sometimes, about the man who had fixed the faucet while his world was ending, about the kind of strength that looked like silence. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for anything except that I know she was sorry. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the cabinet with the old letter from Marcus. Not because they belonged together, but because they belonged in the same category of things that were finished. I did not respond. There was nothing to say that would not be either cruel or dishonest, and I had no interest in being either. But I thought about the letter that night, and in the days that followed. I thought about how people construct narratives to make their choices bearable, how they need witnesses to their regret, even when they cannot undo their actions. I thought about how Rachel needed me to know she was sorry in order to live with herself, but my knowing changed nothing about the reality we had both inhabited. She had left. I had rebuilt. The apology was 20 years too late to matter and exactly on time to save her from the worst of her own self-judgment. I understood then what I had done by donating blood. I had not saved Rachel from death. I had saved myself from becoming someone who could watch another person die out of spite. The distinction mattered. One was about her. The other was about maintaining the integrity of the person I had worked so hard to become. Jenna visited the following month. We did not discuss the letter because I had not told her about it. We cooked dinner together, pasta with vegetables from the farmer's market and bread I had baked that morning. We ate at the table I had refinished 5 years earlier, and she complimented the workmanship the way she always did. After dinner, we sat in the living room with coffee, and she told me about a man she had been seeing, an engineer who worked in sustainable design. She said it was early but felt different from previous relationships. She said he reminded her of me in some ways, in his patience and his careful attention to how things worked. "Is that a good thing?" I asked. She smiled. "It's a very good thing. You taught me what it looks like when someone shows up consistently, when someone keeps their promises even when it's hard, when someone builds something that lasts." "Your mother showed up," I said quietly. "She showed up in the ways she knew how." Jenna looked at me carefully. "Are we really going to do this?" "Do what?" "Pretend that what she did was forgivable just because you donated blood." "I'm not pretending anything. I'm saying that people are complicated, that your mother made terrible choices, but that doesn't mean she didn't love you in her own limited way. She left us. She left me. She tried to keep you." "That's not better, Dad. That's actually worse." I set down my coffee cup and looked at my daughter. She had my mother's eyes and Rachel's cheekbones, and an expression that belonged entirely to herself. She had built a good life, despite carrying a burden she should never have had to carry. She had learned to trust carefully and love fiercely and recognize the difference between someone's intentions and their actual capacity. She had become someone I admired. "You're right," I said. "It is worse. But it's also true that holding on to anger about it will only hurt you. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm asking you to let it be finished." "Is it finished for you?" "Yes." "Because you gave her your blood?" "No. Because I spent 20 years learning how to be okay without her. The blood was just the final piece of that. Proof that I had really let it go." Jenna nodded slowly. She understood, even if she was not ready to follow the same path. That was fine. She would get there in her own time, or she would not, and either way she would be okay. I had made sure of that. She left the next morning after breakfast. I walked her to her car and hugged her goodbye and watched her drive away. Then I went to the garage and started working on a desk I was building for her apartment. Cherry wood, dovetail joints, a design that would last for generations if treated properly. I worked steadily through the afternoon, measuring twice and cutting once, checking the fit of each joint before applying glue, clamping the pieces together with even pressure across all contact points. The work was meditative in the way that all good work was meditative. It required attention, but not anxiety, skill, but not struggle. Each step led naturally to the next. Each decision was bounded by the logic of the material and the requirements of the design. There was a right way to do it, and I knew what that way was, and knowing brought a peace that had nothing to do with Rachel or Marcus or any of the choices that had shaped my life 20 years ago. I finished the desk 3 weeks later. It was beautiful in the way that simple things are beautiful when they are made correctly. I delivered it to Jenna on a Saturday morning, and she cried when she saw it, which embarrassed her and pleased me in equal measure. We set it up in her living room, and she ran her hands over the smooth surface and tested the drawers and declared it perfect. She asked how many hours I had put into it. I told her I had not counted. She said she would treasure it forever. I believed her. Driving home, I thought about treasure and time and the way objects carry, meaning beyond their function. The desk was wood and glue and careful joinery, but it was also a conversation between father and daughter, a demonstration of care that required no words, a promise that some things endure even when others fall apart. It was proof that I had learned something valuable from the ruins of my marriage, which was that love is best expressed through actions that outlast the moment of their making. Rachel sent one more letter 6 months later. It was shorter than the first, only a single page. She thanked me again for saving her life. She told me she had moved to Arizona to be closer to her sister, that she was learning to live alone after decades of defining herself through relationships with men. She said she hoped I was well. She said she thought about me sometimes and hoped I had found happiness. She said she would not write again unless I wanted her to. She included her email address but no phone number. I read the letter once and filed it with the others. I did not respond because there was still nothing to say, but I felt something shift as I closed the cabinet drawer, some final piece of weight I had been carrying without noticing. It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was more like acceptance, the recognition that everyone is doing their best with the emotional tools they have available, and sometimes those tools are insufficient for the tasks required of them. Rachel had done her best, Marcus had done his best, their best had been inadequate and had caused real harm, but it had still been their best. Understanding that did not erase the harm or justify their choices. It simply placed those choices in a larger context where human limitation was the rule rather than the exception. I was 52 years old. I had a job that still challenged me and a daughter who had grown into someone remarkable and a home that I had shaped into exactly what I needed it to be. I had friends who valued my company and projects that required my attention and a body that mostly did what I asked of it. I had learned to find contentment in small perfections, in well-made joints and properly balanced meals and mornings when I woke without the weight of unfinished business pressing against my chest. Some nights I still thought about the young man I had been, the one who believed that love was enough to hold anything together, who thought that patience and loyalty would inevitably be rewarded with the same. I did not miss him exactly, but I remembered him with a kind of gentle sadness. He had learned hard lessons, he had survived them, he had built something good from the rubble. And on one particular morning, when the hospital had called and asked if he would give his blood to the woman who had left him, he had said yes. Not because he was a saint or because forgiveness had transformed him into someone capable of supernatural grace. He had said yes because he had become someone who understood that you do not let people die just because they hurt you. You do not let them die because doing so would make you into someone you would not recognize in the mirror. That was enough. That had always been enough. The rest was just details, just the slow accumulation of days and decisions that added up to a life. I had built a good one. Not the one I had planned, not the one I had imagined when I was 28 and thought I understood how the world worked, but a good one nonetheless. One that held weight, one that would last. I went to the garage and looked at the projects in various stages of completion. A rocking chair that needed a final sanding, a box made from spalted maple that would become a gift for Jenna's birthday, a frame for a mirror that had belonged to my grandmother. Each piece was a conversation with time and material and the careful application of skill. Each piece was proof that I knew how to build things that would outlast the moment of their making. I picked up the sandpaper and got to work. There was always work to be done, always another joint to fit, another surface to smooth, another piece to bring into existence through patience and attention. That was the real lesson I had learned from everything that had happened. You do not control the damage that comes your way. You only control what you build in response to it. I had built well. I was still building, and the work, as it turned out, was its own reward.